I want to welcome you to this class. Today we're going to explore a technique that I'm calling tan depth because it includes creating depth on certain shapes over a tan tile. So these are a couple of examples of this technique that I'm telling you about. I think this is also another really cool example. I didn't care so much for this one, but it's got a lot of perspective and a lot of depth. And this one also is very interesting. The first thing I want you to notice is that this tangle here is a very stylized version of Ixorus. And here too, you have a very stylized version of Ixorus. And then this here is Holobas, and this here is Fescue. And here we have a very stylized version of Naze. And I'm going to show you these on my phone. So this is the original Naze tangle, and so here I have a very stylized version of that. And then a few fragments here. Also, everything very, very stylized. Let me see if I can show you in the primer. So you can see here how I took some of, for example, this one here, and then made it here in this little box. So all I want to point out before we start is that this technique can start with these very highly stylized versions of tangles that we know and love. We're going to jump right in and pull out your tan tile. We're going to start immediately. And the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to settle in your chair and get comfy and relaxed. We're going to pull our pencil. I'm using my beloved F pencil here by Staedtler Mars. This is my favorite pencil. And what we're going to do is start with the classic Zentangle method, where I'm going to look at this page at this tile, and I'm going to mark 4 little dots, just like we do in the regular Zentangle method. And the next thing you do, you all know, we're going to loosely connect this with a line, and we're going to make a little frame. I'm making my frame a little bit darker on the screen so that you can see, but you should make this really light. The next thing I'm going to do, instead of creating a string with a pencil, I'm going to invite you to pull your charcoal pencil. I'm using the General's Charcoal White, and I have to tell you that this is probably my favorite white pencil. It is very, very bright when you draw over tan paper. You can also use a Derwent white, a Chinese white. I also like this one very much. I would prefer that you not use a colored pencil, and I will tell you in a second why, because this is going to be a temporary mark, and with a colored pencil there's no chance that we can make it temporary. So I think that if you use a charcoal pencil, that would be the best solution. So I'm going to invite you now to create a square on this tile, and you don't have to make it very big, but let's make it about an inch. I would say this is approximately 2 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters, and it does not need to be perfectly aligned. It can be centered, it can be in any position that you want, but I want you to create it fairly thick like that, as you can see. And what we're going to do is we are going to divide it in half. And I will show you the technique of creating depth right here on our project, directly on our project. So once you have that, then the next thing that we need to do is to pull out our brown pen, and I am using this Graphic Line Maker 01. I really like the color of the sepia instead of the micron. You can use the micron also, but I find this one to have a more ochre tone than the regular brown that is very pleasant to me. So I prefer to do that. All right, so now that we have that, you have this little square and you have your pen of choice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to contour the inside only of this square with my pen. Do not contour the outside for now because we've got a lot to do. And now I want to show you how this is going to work. You can see here how I have these open holes, and it seems like the lines go in and they create this depth. And that's what is the main topic of our class today, is how to create depth in practically anything that you can draw from a flat surface. So let me show you another example. This one is one that I've been working on in the middle of the night, and you can see here how I have these holes. Okay, and the depth is created by adding all of these millions of different little auras. But there is a way to do it that will help you to make it easier to think about it. This is a thought intense process, but I racked my brain to find a way that would make it easier for you to not have to think too hard about how to create this depth. So I want you to look at this little square that you created, and I want you to either decide in which position it's going to be. It could be very well like this or like this. It doesn't really matter. But once you've decided on a position where you want the square to be, I'm going to ask you to look at the upper left corner of your interior of the outline, and I'll ask you to pull a couple of little lines like that. They're going to be parallel. And once you've done that, then I'm going to ask you to go to put your tile in diagonal like this, where the lines are perfectly vertical in this direction. And I want you to pull up a line, okay, that is parallel to these two little lines. And I want you to make a mark at the top of your tile like that. And this way, what's going to happen is that you will have a mark of where the depth has to be placed. This is going to be your upper left. Now, this doesn't always have to be that way. I want to show you, for example, here on this one. On this one here, you can see that these little lines are not perfectly parallel to each other, but they are a little bit more in this direction here. The tile is not perfectly diagonal. So it doesn't always need to be where the tile is perfectly in a 45-degree angle like that. I want to show you another example here where the depth is also at this. In some cases, it's going in other directions. But I recommend you not do that right away. Stay with this more or less 45-degree angle. If it varies a little bit in this direction or that direction, it does not matter. That's fine, as long as you choose one and you have that mark on top of your tile. So if it's displaced, if it is more like that, or if it's more vertical like that, it really does not matter. The next thing that you're going to do is to actually create the depth, to create the auras, very thin auras that are parallel to your outline. So I created 3 little auras there. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other opening. And so I've created 3 little auras there. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create auras on the top portion. And again, I'm creating 3 little lines. And you may notice in your drawing that the spacing of these lines may have to be a little bit different than on the other side. And that's totally fine. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so here you've created your first little square, your first little opening with depth. That's essentially the concept of how to create depth. If you wanted to create something that was a little bit deeper, all you have to do is extend that diagonal line and add more. So I'm going to add 2 more on each side. And you can see almost the depth appearing already. And if you wanted to make it really look incredibly deep, then all you would have to do is extend the line until you can no longer extend it and keep on adding those little auras. And finally here, it looks like it went all the way into the depths. So you can see that opening. The shading will happen afterwards, later, and it's going to even increase even more the appearance of depth of this picture. So this is the very, very basic of it, and I want to show you a few examples. And here you have these openings. This is obviously the most basic thing that you can do, and here you can see how they're getting, some of them go just a part of it, create some kind of a width, and some of them go all the way inside. So my recommendation is for you to stay with one of these 3 options: 3 lines, 5 lines, or all the way. And we're going to talk more about that also, why I chose these options. So now that we have that, let's create more stuff, because this is obviously very boring. So I'm going to invite you to take your charcoal pencil again, and I'm going to invite you to take one of these lines and extend it. And if you can, it's very fun to extend in a gentle curve, and extend it on both sides. And then I'm going to invite you to choose another one that's intersecting and do the same thing and extend it all the way to the edge. You want to make this very smooth, this curve. You want to make sure that it's very smooth and continuous. And then the next thing that I'm going to ask you is to extend another one, but not all the way. So I'm going to let it stop right there. We'll do something different. And let's see how we can work some patterns in there. Let's extend this one too. So extend 2 from edge to edge. So this one is edge to edge. This one is extended only to one corner, and this one is also extended to one corner. So it's more fun if you create something that is different than mine, but feel free to do exactly as I'm doing if you want to. And now we're going to choose one of these areas, and I'm going to add some of these different lines in here so that I can create different kind of boxes. So this box, this opening is very square, rectangular, very rigid. So I want to start by creating something that is a little bit more irregular. Now, if you created your line, your border line very softly, you won't need to erase, but since I created mine very strongly so that you could see, I'm erasing mine, but just for the purposes of the video. And we're going to do this, we're going to create some zigzag. Choose one of the openings and let's create a zigzag. Now this technique, I'll tell you, you do not want to add all of your lines at once. You want to add very gradually, because if you add them all at once, you create a surface that is all on the top, and you don't want that. You want to work with the levels. See how some of these are lower. So we have to work a little bit at a time. So try to stop that impulse of adding too much at once. And let's see what we can do to this design. We're going to start exactly like we did before with our brown pen. And we're going to draw the inside outline. And I'm going to try to make it very continuous with those original boxes. You can see how the charcoal is only a reference. The internal outline on these as well. So how does that work with this one? We have our little reference line here. So now we have to move this reference line into our top corners. So here I can create a line that's parallel to this, like that. But here I can't, because it would be behind the white. So in this case, we wouldn't create the line. So let's start with this one first to see how it goes. Create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when I turn my tile to create 5 lines, you will see that there's not a lot of room here. And so I will have to make this distance 3, 4, 5. So you can see how these lines are a lot more squished on the other side than they are on the first one. So that's a big difference there. This other one that does not have a continuous shape, an enclosed shape, is tricky, but all we have to do is look at this one and imagine, okay, these are going continuously, so it gives me a hint that all I have to do to make it look three-dimensional is to continue these lines. So this is where the thinking part starts. Now, what do you do with these other guys? So the rule is you add lines, you add auras to the side or to the corner that is closest to your mark. So instead of adding lines to these two, I would add to this one because this edge is closest to my mark. So I go ahead and create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one too. This one is closest to my mark. Now you can say, well, which one is closest to my mark? When I say closer to my mark, I mean if I had the paper and it continued here, you could see that I could form parallel lines everywhere. And so you have to think which one is going to be closest to the upper left. It's more or less the same principle as shading. For me, if I imagine that these little marks are all over the edge here, then it becomes very clear to me that this is the side that is closest to that mark. And so I'm going to do the same thing that I did with this other one. So you're always looking for clues with your other openings. Let's say that you had a line, and let's say that I have my opening like this, and it just happens that my marking line is completely parallel, is very, very parallel. So you don't want to add anything on that line. So the side that is closest to your mark is going to be this one. you don't add the corner at all. So there are going to be times when you will add that corner, that chamfer there, and there are times when you're not going to. So you would just add the lines simply like that. You have to imagine that the width is underneath. It's so parallel that you cannot see it. So it's going to be almost like these guys. This is a very tricky technique. And to find the closest one, I'm going to use again this scrap piece of paper here. And let's say that I had the opening here. And I'll just create a few more openings so that we can test them. And let's say that my mark is there. So if you imagine that your mark is parallel everywhere, I'm not trying to turn the mark. I'm trying to make it as parallel as possible. And if I imagine that I have a shower of these different little marks on the top left, okay? So top left. It's really important that you understand that. So let's try, for example, this one. I look at the corner. I have this corner here, which is closest to the top left. And so I can create a mark there. I have another corner that is closest to the top left. I can create another mark there. But here, I don't have a corner that is closest. I have an edge. So it will always alternate between a corner and an edge. If I have a corner, fine, I complete it. But if I don't have one corner, these two are, I can't do them because they are underneath the white. So then I would just use the edge and create that parallel. So you're always looking for shapes that are closer. And let me show you a few examples so that you can really understand this. Here I have a corner where I can add that line. Here you can see that the line was almost impossible to add. I added it there, but it got hidden under the shadows. Here I had a corner where I can add the line. If you can add the corner, then you do. But if you can't, then there's nothing you can do. You have to add the lines parallel to the edge instead. So there's two situations. There's actually three, in fact. A shape where you can add the corner, an edge that is closest to the upper left, and then there's one more. And we'll talk about it in a sec. Let's say that you have a situation where you have the inner triangle or even a line, whatever it is, and when you create your corner, one of them is very tight. So you create 1, 2, 3, and they're very tight. You have a lot more room in the other. So I will say that it is best to keep them spaced out and have the same amount, because you will create an illusion of perspective that is more accurate. But if you had the temptation and you couldn't help yourself and you added an extra line there, it's fine, because in the end, there's going to be so much shading here that you're not really going to be able to see. Nobody's going to come here and count if I have exactly the same amount of lines. But ideally, you don't want to cheat the drawing out of having those super tight lines. You can see here how these are tight and these are more spaced out, just because the perspective will seem a little bit more accurate. Okay, so if you do it, if you add an extra line, don't worry too much about it. But it's best if you keep the same amount of lines. So we haven't done anything on the outside, and now we're going to move on to the outside of these lines. So I'm going to invite you to add some outlines on your white charcoal pencil marks. You can create the lines everywhere. So you should have something more or less like that or variation. And I encourage you to try variation. And now we've got to do the same process again. We've got to look at any corners that are pointing to the upper left. So this corner, if I look at this corner here, it's not pointing at the upper left. So that doesn't work. This corner here, if I look at it, it's pointing towards the upper left. See how it's pointing there? So those are the corners you want to choose. I'm going to create something that is more or less parallel to my mark. I'm going to look at the other corners. This corner is not pointing to the upper left. This corner is not pointing to the upper left, but this other one is pointing to the upper left. So I'm going to add another line there. And that was it. Only 2 of them have corners. So we're going to start with the corners, and I'm going to create 3 to 5 auras. You want them to be very tight. 1, 2, 3. I can leave it open like that. And see here, I left a little tail, and it's fine. It doesn't matter because I still don't know how long I'm going to make this. So don't worry if you have a little tail left over there. I'm going to create 3 auras on this side as well. And so you can clearly see here how the spacing of this one is a little bit farther apart than the spacing on this side. I'm going to repeat the process here. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Now we only had 2 corners here to deal with, and that gave us the thickness of it. But what about the rest? I see that I need the width here in some other capacity. And so I'm going to use the first ones to give me hints about where it should go. So if I see that this goes in this direction here, and I have this line which is continuous to that one, then this gives me the hint that I can add 3 more over there. And the same thing on this other side. This is a continuous line. So this width here is giving me the hint that I can continue on the other side. And so now you can see how 3-dimensional that is starting to look. So now what we have here is we have a situation where we have the top layer practically done. And you can see here now how I have these top layers, and everything that is in the same plane of that white charcoal is going to be on the top layer. We're going to start adding now other things because we want to play with this a little more. So I'm going to invite you to take your charcoal pencil again, and let me see if I can create a curve that goes into a strange direction that goes up here. See how we would develop that. So at this point, you have a choice of what you want to add. Let's say that you wanted to add another decorative element that can have these fescue. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to add 1 more here. And you can see that I'm not going all the way to the top white charcoal. I'm staying within the boundaries of the width. And I'm going to interrupt it there. So this is a very free-form technique where you can intuitively add more lines, but you add them one at a time, trying to deal with the way that the drawing is asking you to add the depth. In this one, I'm going to add some thick, very thick fescues. And so this is the time when you want to be mindful of not creating lines that are parallel to this direction. So one way to really do that is when I'm creating my white charcoal, lines, I try to keep the pen in that direction. So I make sure that I'm not creating anything that will be parallel to the pen. This helps me to be a little bit more mindful of where my planes are going to go. And you can see that it's very rough. And once again, I'm going to take the brown pen and add the contour here, only until the line, not crossing it at all. You can turn your tile. And I have this single one here, and it's fine. And I added it double on the second layer. And on the third layer, I'm going to contour the entire thing, including the little fescues. I'm not leaving any sparkles. I'm creating a continuous line. And here I have another line that goes in there. I already have a line there, so I don't have to do that. And I will keep adding this outline. Once everything is outlined, then it's time to think about our corners. I'm going to look at each one of the corners and think, is it pointing to the right direction? So here we have a lot of corners. I'm going to start with this corner here. If I point it here, it's not pointing up. This one's 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 not pointing up. So you keep on going with that. Now this one is pointing up. So I will create a line that is more or less parallel and add that corner there. And the same thing over here. This one is also pointing up. So I'm adding another line there. This one pointing down, pointing down, pointing down, pointing down. Here also pointing up. Great. Okay, so we add another. Here also pointing up. This one pointing up and in a very strange way. This one pointing down. This one pointing that direction. So it's not really in the right place. This one pointing down. Here it's hidden. So you can see that we have just a few. And you can see how I didn't do a very good job at keeping them parallel, but do the best you can to keeping them parallel. In the end, the shading will take care of it. So here comes the third situation where you want to observe what needs width. And this is this area here with these fescues. We looked at the corners. We looked at edges that are pointing up. And now the third situation is we want to look at tangents. So I don't have a lot going on here to tell me how I would work the width in these little fescues. So I'm going to imagine that my pen is pointing down, and I'm going to look at the areas that have a tangent. See how the tip of the pen is pointing to the tip of the fescue? Watch that. And once you have a place where the pen would touch the tangent and you can pull a line down, you add another one there. In this other area, I would also look at these other curves. So here I can see also that this edge can be pulled down. Here I have another corner that is pointing up. So I can add one more. And this has given me more or less a clearer indication of how to work this fescue. And the same thing here. I'm going to use my pen pointing down and see where is it that it touches the outside, the tangents of the fescues. So I have these two spots and this third spot, and this one here, and this one here too. And I can't do anything here because it's going to go inside the white. So this is already enough to give me a really solid guideline as to where I have to add my width to the fescues. The other thing is that I pulled this these lines down. So I'm going to pull this one down a little bit more as well, so that it's going to be continuous. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to imagine here that this line, which is a curve, so we see that it's changing its direction. So this is a situation where the line has the edge there, but then it turns. And so we will have an imaginary line somewhere. We have to think about those imaginary lines that continue. If I continued this line here, then you can see how it would also form this tangent, this parallel. And here would be that line that we would pull. So I would start by pulling these auras over here, very close. But once I remove that, then that's how I know where to start my curve. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did. Let's start and see where we can add those lines. I'm going to add 3 at a time. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to go in the other direction. 1, 2, 3. Here too, starting with the corners. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, and 3. So you can see how this created a wider depth to that top line here. And this is how we can get these different levels. You can see that the first layer was added solid, and then the other layers are added interrupted by those corners. We'll see more of that. So I'm going to work on these that are easier. 1, 2, and 3. And then work on these closer ones. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're getting to the scary part, which is with all the fescues and everything. I'm going to finish off this first. You want to be able to see this as much as possible. So instead of working the scary parts, I recommend that you work the parts that you know. So this part here, we can work really well. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Here, it's the same situation. I would create an aura. 1, 2, 3. It's not a perfect perspective, but it's good enough for this because there's going to be a lot of shading. When we get to these scary parts that are very confusing with a lot of little marks, now here comes the next rule. You want to work what is lower first. So these are lower, and so instead of working these guys first, I want to work these guys first because they're lower. 1, 2, and 3. Same thing. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. And this is an opportunity for you to decide, do I really want to have it just be this little width, or perhaps I could make it go all the way down. Instead of having 3, maybe I'll make it go all the way down. And that creates a really deep sensation where it looks like these fescues are going forever. So all I'm doing here is extending them and then completing with more lines. So as I said, it's either 3, 5, or a whole bunch. Now that we have this and we decided to continue our fescues forever, I'm going to extend the other lines as well in this fescue and add another set of auras. And we still have this little area here. And so you can see that now this is more three-dimensional and a little less worrisome. Let's add some lines here. 1, 2, 3, passing behind. And here too. 1, 2, and 3. So now I can decide if I want to go for 5 or if I want to go for a whole bunch.
I think that I'm going to continue with a whole bunch. So just extend the lines and keep on going. And here too. And here too. So in terms of perspective, this is not 100% accurate, obviously, because there would be more distortion, but I think this is the easiest that we can do. And here I want to also choose some other areas that might go forever. For example, in this one, I might want to make it go all the way to the bottom, but maybe not that one. So you can choose which ones you want to have go all the way down. I'm going to extend this one too. So you can see how this is coming along. We have this other area here, if you may have added. Let's keep it short for now because we have a few more things to play with. So don't try to extend all of them to the deep depths. Only the ones that feel a little busy, like this fescue is super busy, so I didn't want to add anything else here. I want to elaborate a little bit more on creating curves. Now, I want you first to notice how this technique has some curves that are very simple. In all of these examples, I tried very hard to avoid drastic curves. And one of the reasons why I'm trying to avoid that is because when you have a curve that is radical and turning this direction and that direction, then you're going to also have to think a lot harder as to where the depth, where the width is going to happen. And so here you can see how even when I added these fescues, I didn't make them turn around so much that they completely change direction, but still they do sometimes. So the first recommendation, of course, is that you try to avoid things that curve too much. So let's say that you have something like this. So you can see that if my mark is there, right, and I'm turning in this way and turning on that way, look what's happening to it. Imagine that your mark is always trying to create parallel lines that go in this direction. Now here, oh, you're turning. I can't do it anymore. Okay, here I can. I can. So by using this technique of creating an imaginary set of lines like that, you can start to understand a little more how these situations would happen. So this is a really cool and fun technique, which is, by the way, the same technique that you would use to create shadows. So if you can master this technique, then you will also make your directional shadows a lot better. So let's say that I had another curve. So try this little practice. Let's see here, I'm adding this line. I can't add it here. I can add it inside. Try to add a little line. Oop, sorry, can't go anymore. Can't. Here I can. So whenever you have the white chalk, you cannot draw the line. But once you don't have the white chalk, you can add these little lines that are always heading towards that direction, just like a shadow. So if you have an issue of not understanding really well how this is going to work, you have a shape, pull out a piece of paper and work more or less your shape and separately like I've done here. And here this is going to give you a clear indication of how your auras are going to work. So they end at a certain point. And here too, you pull that line and they will end. They won't go in that direction. And they will never go in two directions. If you've added them on this side, you cannot add them on that side because your directional mark says go that way. This is exactly the same theory for shadows. All right, so let's continue with that. If you have something that you want to go all the way down, then you would continue with your lines, and you would continue with these lines that go forever and ever and ever. And so here we have these lines that are going to continue. And they're going to continue until you hit something. So this is what happened here. We added that directional line. We added lines that go parallel, 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 until, okay, they hit something, and that's it. For the final tangling of this class, I want to add some Holobas, and this is a lot easier because now that we have already this grid, you can add Holobas lines using your white charcoal. And again, you want to avoid lines that go in a parallel line. And here is an idea by Darcy that if you want to find out where the lines are, take a second tile and place it like that, and then you can see how, you see this one is not really parallel. Oops, not a great job there, Annie, but that's fine. You can see all the lines that we're pulling here. So our last part is going to be adding some Holobas, and you want to try to avoid adding them parallel to your mark. And additionally, you want to avoid adding too many. Don't add two. Add only one in each section at a time. So I'm going to add anything that is not parallel to my mark is going to be fine. And here I was going to do one like that, but that would be parallel, so I'm going to move something to something like this. So now we do the same thing. We take the brown pen and we add the outline for these Holobas. That's our first step. And now comes that part where, again, let's use Darcy's method and let's see where can we add a line. If I move my second tile, I can see that that here allows me a little corner. This one does not because it goes into the white. And here too. Excellent, excellent technique. Thank you so much, Darcy. And here, what else? Here, this one. I have a little bit there. Just a tiny one. That I can't because it'll go into the white. I can't. Nothing else, I can't. But if I imagine that this line continued on and hit something, then I would probably be able to do that. So let's work on the lines that we know. Again, 1, 2, and 3. And continuing on the other direction. And here again, we have a clue because we added more here. So we have to add more on this side as well. So you can see how that makes it look like the beam is embedded into the side of this wall. That's what we're aiming for. So 1, 2, and 3. Create the 3 other lines, and then to make it look like this is a solid wall. So you're saying, well, didn't you say that you can't have lines on both sides? Well, this is on both sides of this one, but it doesn't belong to this charcoal line. These lines belong to this charcoal line. And here too. And here I'll continue so that I create a smooth wall over there. And see, here I didn't continue and it looks a little odd. See, these lines, I should have continued all the way over here. So let's take a moment to find those areas where the walls are not smooth and continuous. And now you can see how it really looks like these things are embedded there. And this one too, this one doesn't have any corners, but I know by association, because this one looks parallel to this one, that it's going to have lines that go towards the bottom. And now I can add one more layer of Holobas. This is where the fun begins, really. It's the only moment where you can relax and have some Zen flow. And I'm going to create perhaps another series of charcoal lines. See, it's almost parallel, but not quite. So if you have to go parallel, then try to create an angle there. And here, and perhaps another one over here, and this one going all the way across. So your drawing will offer you these options, but you want to always try to be not parallel to that thing. And I want to see, the temptation is so great. I want to add something that goes like that. I'm going to create something that goes like this. And once again, adding my brown outlines to each one of the white charcoal. And then starting to think about those corners. And so you can see here how I'm moving this along. And here I can have a corner. And I can't have anything else there. Let's see these new ones. I can have one there. I can have one there. And that's pretty much it, I think. So now complete the auras. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And continue on the other side. Oops, I got a corner there, so be mindful of those other corners. And here too, I have a line that continues, and that's why we're using the white charcoal, because it gives us a very clear indication of where that Holoba beam is going. And here too. So if you're having a hard time with the curves, then try to make so that your pictures only have straight-ish lines, and that will make your life a lot easier when it comes to these. And see here, I've got this, and it's giving me a clear indication that it should continue on the other side as well. So at this moment here, when our drawing is pretty much complete in terms of all the crazy marks that I want to add, I can choose what I want to make happen really deep and what I want to make happen a little bit more shallow. And this is the time where you can also create, if you're an advanced artist and you want to add some things that are curving like that at the bottom. And so here, if you wanted to do that, let me see if I have a situation where if I wanted to make this a little bit more interesting, I could extend the line, add a couple more, and then pull lines that are more like echo lines. And so you can see how they're veering like that. You see if I have another spot. I filled in this so much that I don't have a lot of room for this. So I would start to shorten the lines a little bit and curve them out. You see if I can do that again here. And so I would shorten them out, almost like the tangle roots. If you're familiar with that one, if you have this line like this, and so you start to pull these lines that are shorter and shorter and shorter, And so you're creating almost like a gentle curve. So if you want to add that to the ends of some of your beams, then that would work too. I find it a lot more interesting to keep on making them go all the way to the bottom. I find that just super fun. And so here's when you would just add more width to this. And here we've got to continue to decide what's going to be a little bit deeper and what isn't. You can choose to leave certain areas open, and you'll see that some of them are just asking for more. Like this seems to be asking me to continue that. And so let's take a moment and see if we can finish off the tangling and either fill in all the spots or leave some of them open. All right, so I want to get to the shading because this is an interesting kind of shading. And so I'm going to finish some of my areas here. And I might not finish all of them. So I think that I'm going to just finish off these triangles and make all of them really very, very deep. I want to show you the shading because this is very interesting. It's a fun process, and I hope that you will be a little more relaxed during the shading than during the tangling. We have here, for most part, we have these flat surfaces, and as such, we want to treat them like flat surfaces. When we shade curved areas, we usually shade something and we leave a highlight in the center, either by adding the white charcoal or by leaving the white paper. But when it comes to these more or less flat walls, you don't want to treat it in that way because they are flat. The shading of a flat surface is very different than the shading of a curved surface. If you have a cube here and I have these flat surfaces, the shading is usually very flat, and the easiest way to do it is to go in diagonal like that. And so you are choosing one side to be the receiver of the main light. So let's say that this is the lightest area. So the light is going to hit smack on that. This is going to receive a little bit less light, so I'll leave it tan because the tan is already medium. And this one is the part that is the darkest area. So this is your simple shading for a flat surface. So three sides, you have one lighter, you have one medium, and you have one darker. But in reality, it doesn't happen so much like that. If my light source is like this, and once again, I want to caution you because in Zentangle, traditional Zentangle, we don't use a directional light source, but this is not quite in the same line as Zentangle, so I'm going to use a directional light source. When you have this light that is coming from over here, okay, and it's hitting directly this, you won't have a perfectly uniform surface. You will have a slight variation on that surface. So let's say that if the light is hitting over here, you will have a very small amount of difference where this corner here, which is away, is going to be a little bit darker than this corner, which is in the bright, it's closer to that bright light. The same thing here. This corner, which is very hidden from the light, might be a little darker than this other corner because there might be a secondary light that comes from this side. And so if you work in this way from diagonal to diagonal, you usually get a better chance of creating something interesting. And here too, let's say that the light is hitting more here. This other corner is probably going to be a hint darker. So you have just a tad of a variation within these three values. So there's two layers of shading. Let's see, where's our drawing? So the first layer that we want to think about is, where is our light source and what are the areas that are the darkest areas? I'm going to use the same mark as the light source. And because of that, I'm going to choose one of these sides to say, well, it's either going to be the one that's more vertical or the one that's more horizontal. You've got to choose one. I'm going to choose the one that is more vertical, and I'm going to mark those with my pencil in a very uniform way. I'm using a super short F pencil, and that helps me to put it sideways like that. And when I do this, I can choose all the vertical sides and make them a little bit darker. And here too, because this is vertical, so I'm going to make it uniformly darker. This is my choice of which side is the darkest one. And so I'm going to choose all my vertical lines that are to the right side of each charcoal line and make them uniformly darker. I'm not trying to create any variation at all. And you're perhaps wondering about these guys, and we'll get there. But first, I'm starting with the easy ones. And you can see that immediately this starts to acquire a much more three-dimensional look just because I'm playing with the vertical lines, the vertical sides or the vertical walls, and creating this uniform shading. And here too. One thing that you might want to do is, if you have an open space, you might not want to go all the way to the end, because then that gives us an opportunity to play with rim light, if you know what that is. If you don't know what that is, then don't worry about it. So everything that is more or less vertical, all the surfaces that are more or less vertical, are going to be shaded this way. So it's very formulaic. Just look at the ones that are vertical. Then the next thing that we want to choose is the one that is the brightest one. Okay? If I imagine that my light is hitting like this, I want to think that the tops that are white are being hit the most, but also it's spreading out a little bit into these more horizontal. So the horizontal ones are going to be the medium value, right? So bright and dark and medium. Now, what do we do with these diagonals? These diagonals, you've got to make a choice. You've got to think, is it more vertical or is it more horizontal? And then you make that choice and commit to it. I'm choosing this one to decide that this one is more vertical than horizontal. This one, yeah, maybe a little bit. No, I've got too many things around it, so I'm going to keep it more horizontal. This one is more vertical. So based on what you see next door to it, if I decided to choose that this was more vertical, I'd have too many things that were vertical. So that's what I'm going to use as my reference. It's the contrast between these different surfaces. And here too, I have one that seems pretty vertical. So it really is a choice. I'm going to make this a little bit more shaded because this is more curved. so I can play a little bit with the highlight. These are more curved, so I'm going to leave it there for now, and also curved. So I've got a pretty good block out of what needs to be darker and what needs to be lighter. And once I've done that with my pencil, then I'm ready to add the second layer of shading that we're going to use the colored pencil for that. I'm going to use a brown pencil. You can use a dark brown or a light brown, but I like this one. This is a Polychromos Bister. And now my second layer of shading is going to be the following. I'm going to look for the deepest spots. Like, let's say that this area here, when I look at this, I'm going to try to see it three-dimensionally, and I'm going to take one plane at a time. I'm going to switch the direction. I'm going to put my drawing upside down, and I'm going to look for the point that is farthest away from my mark inside of that shape. And so here I have that first little square that we created, and I'm going to work in this direction, making it gently softer. So what I'm doing here is, if I have whatever is the shape that I have, I'm trying to make it very dark on that corner, and then gently lifting my pencil and making it softer and softer. So I'm forming almost like a gradient with the deepest, darkest corner right there on that spot. And this spot is the spot that is the opposite one to the one where we added that mark. The one that is farthest away from this mark, which is also the place where we have our light source. So here, this corner, I'm going to pull this one. I'm working only on this plane. I'm not working on this one either, yet. And I'm going to work on this plane and keep creating that gradient in the darkest points. I can also get the darkest point of this little plane here. So I'm going to start here, and once again, pull that gradient. So you can see that it's a different plane. So I'm working with it separately. You're not arbitrarily just adding lines, the shading to everything. Each plane is treated separately, starting at the darkest point and then pulling up. So this little plane here is going to be treated here. I don't have a corner that is darkest, so I would start at the edge and pull it up. And this one too, start at the edge and pull it up. When you turn this upside down, it shows you that effect that we created. So here's where it gets a little tricky. I mean, these are a little easier because I can just start there and make it lighter there. Now, when you look at this plane, this entire surface here, this is not a little small thing here. So I have to start at the darkest point and keep going and try to match the level of darkness so that when you look at this surface, it is a uniform thing. So you have to do it in segments, but you're trying to make it very uniform. You're trying to make it so that the darkest areas are matching more or less. And here we have this lighter area. So you want to make it smooth because this is a flat surface, or flat-ish. It's not super flat. And I'm going to continue with others. Like this one here has 2 points. Start at the darkest one and pull it up. And start there and pull it up, and trying to match them so that it's uniform and blended. Now my video is showing a little bit of this gradient on the red side. This brown here is looking very red, but in my own eyes, this is a very dark brown. So here too, I started very dark and then trying to blend it out in a similar surface. And here, instead of a point, we have an edge that should be darker. So I'm going to keep working that way. It's either a point or an edge that is going to be receiving that gradient. And so this creates a secondary layer of shading over these beams that really works well in terms of making it look three-dimensional. Look at that. And here too. You can vary between the colored pencil if you don't want it to be so grainy and the F pencil and make the shading a little smoother. But I like to add a little bit of color. And because here I don't have anything, I have the background that is the negative space. I'm going to leave an area there for my rim light. Okay, so what we're doing is this. We turned our tile upside down and we're using the edge or the corner that is farthest away from our mark to start. And that's where you're going to point the pencil to. So here, this is upside down. This is the farthest that I can reach in this plane. I can't go any further than that. And so this is where I start. And if you want to turn your tile in a diagonal like that, you can turn in a diagonal and do the shading up and down on a, but always starting on the, in this case, it would be an edge. That's the farthest. But here too, this would probably be even farther. So I could bring it all the way over here. This is also a corner that would be very dark. So you want to think of the areas that are super dark, that would be hidden from the light. By turning the tile this way and pointing your pencil this direction, you're starting at the darkest points. Okay, so here it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. So I'm going to leave a little area for my rim light. And if you want to use your pencil, your charcoal pencil, to mark it so that you are not going on top of it, then you can do that too. And then imagine that your darkest area is just above that rim light. Okay, yeah. And so I'm starting at the darkest area and just moving up, 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 and fading out. And here too, this is going to be super dark. So I'm going to keep on adding that to all the other areas. So here I'm going to leave a little bit of an area there for the rim light. And here I added too much, I think. So try to make it so that it's a gradient, not a solid surface like that. And finally, I got this one. This layer of shading is a gradient, not a solid color. You're going from very dark to nothing, to very light. And when you turn it upside down, boom, you have this secondary layer of shading that is really interesting. And the last kind of shading that you're going to do is you're going to think a little bit about shadows. And we want to think about how these walls would affect the lower levels. So for example, I think that this light here would cast a shadow from this large wall over this little segment here. So I'm going to add a tiny bit like that. And you really don't need to do much. Just add a little bit of shading as if it were a shadow, because it really isn't casting a whole bunch. It's just a little bit. if you feel like you want to add it on both sides, that's fine. But normally you would probably only do it where a segment is lower and the wall right next to it casts a shadow over it. I want to make one more comment about the curves. You can see here how you can say there's a lot of curves here, but there really aren't. They are quite straight. This is inspired on the tangled quabog, and they are not very curved, so they don't go all the way around. This is one area where you really don't want to play too much with Muka and all those curly cues. So now, as our last two steps that we need to do, we're going to add the white gel pen. And if you have a tortillon that is fairly clean, this is not amazingly clean, but if it's kind of clean, then that would also help. If you don't, then just use your blending stump. And what we're going to do is this. We're going to start by adding gel pen to the top layer, to that first level of white charcoal lines that we created the very beginning. So here I have, I'm adding this in a very smooth and generous surface. You can make it very even, but when we get to the second level or third level, then you want to try to apply it more towards the center and not go over that shadow that we just created. And after you've added this, then immediately take your tortillon and you can blend in the white gel pen with the shading there so you don't get a very harsh line. So what you don't want is to have lines that look like this, that, and then here's that shadow. You don't want to have this very marked line. You want to immediately take your tortillon and see if you can blend out. And the gel pen can be very easily blended in with a shading. Here I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do one line at a time and immediately switch and see if I can blend it out. You can also do it with your fingers if you're not grossed out. And then complete all of the different segments with this technique. The higher levels, you can just go directly and paint it. And the lower levels, you want to make sure that you're blending the shadow. And the reason why we're doing that is because it's fairly difficult to apply shading that is nice and blended over gel pen. So that's why we applied the shading before. It always looks a little plasticky, in my opinion, when you try to apply shading over white gel pen. So let's see if we can enjoy a few moments of Zenflow with that. I also want to mention one more thing is that the white gel pen will smear. So you really have to be very careful where you apply it and let it dry very carefully. You're not smearing your drawing all over. Because again, the white colored pencil is difficult to shade, and it's once you apply the white charcoal, I thought that we were going to make more mistakes than we did. The white charcoal can be easily removed if you want to. See here, it's if I need to get rid of it, I can. But we didn't make any very strong mistakes that I felt like, oops, let's not do that. But I have done several in my previous drawings. So when I did it with the gel pen, oh my gosh, I did really not do that well. And so the charcoal is a little more forgiving when you're applying shading. We only have one more step after this, and then we're done. And then if we want to add that rim light at the very bottom of these empty areas, so this is the place where you have some negative space there, you can use your white colored pencil. I forgot a few here. So you can add your white colored pencil to those areas that are near the negative space, and that way creating this effect that there's a light that's coming from the bottom or from other areas, other sources. And as a last and final touch, if you have a honey colored pencil and you want to add some coloring to the background, then you can add to those areas that are near those white colored pencil lines that you just created for the rim light. And I'm using that frame that we created way back when we started the project. So I'm going to continue here, and everywhere that I have that rim light, I'm going to add a little bit of that honey color and also fade it out. So this gives some work, some separation to the background. Here, forgot to add a rim light. And you can also add this all the way around if you like. I always like to add this edge to the work because I feel that it makes it more finished. So I'm using my pencil sideways. What is it that you do with this line here, this mark that stayed there and helped you throughout thick and thin? So there's one thing that you can do is that you can extend it. If you've got it boxed into a little corner like that, then you can add some lines that go, let's say, follow another one of these corners, choose one corner, and add similar lines to that. So I'm going to add here these lines and these lines. And then shade it normally like you did with all the others. Okay, this side a little darker. And then the deeper area and the deeper area. And in the end, let's see if I can even continue this. Okay, because it looks like it would need something right here. It'll look like it's part of the drawing. So you can see how, let me see if I have one. Here's one that I did. See, the mark got incorporated into the drawing. It just looks like it continues on. Time to add your chop and date the back.
And this is it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Please let others know where you learned these techniques, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.